Good evening, trustees, HDSB administrators, and parents, community members in the gallery who are here to engage in democracy. Thank you for this opportunity. I am speaking this evening to address the HDSB draft professionalism policy. To begin, in the February 15th Director's interim report, it was stated that, quote, "We are mindful that we are in a period of statutory freeze according to the Ontario Labour Relations Act. To that end, I wish to make clear to the board that this perceived roadblock seems unwarranted. Ontario employment and labour lawyer Howard Levitt made public comment on this matter, citing that, quote, "The employer cannot change wages or benefits or other significant negotiated terms of employment during a statutory freeze, and that, quote, every collective agreement permits the employer to require its employees to dress reasonably, and even more so to require that a teacher of young people be a role model for civility and professionalism. The statutory freeze is therefore immaterial." Secondly, the Minister of Education has stated, quote, "The Halton School Board has an obligation to ensure that classrooms are safe and respectful places to learn. Teachers need to uphold the highest professional standards when they are in front of children. Both the Ontario College of Teachers and the Ministry of Education have publicly affirmed that boards already have the necessary authorities to enforce professional standards and the tools they need to do so. Even the Director's interim report validates this. The draft policy clearly states that its purpose is to, quote, "consolidate and affirm existing expectations regarding staff professionalism, including dress and decorum." There is nothing new to be created. This is not a policy documentation issue. The only problem here is policy interpretation and enforcement for all staff, because as we know, policies without enforcement are meaningless. This leads us to the crux of the matter, the claim that the very definition of the term professionalism may somehow infringe upon human rights granted to all staff. There is widespread acceptance in Canada that the term implies conducting oneself with responsibility, integrity, accountability, and excellence in alignment with a particular set of ethics, morals, and standards of behavior. For example, the Ontario College of Teachers says this about professionalism, quote, "Ontario certified teachers understand the imbalance of power they have with students and are careful to manage their responsibilities with respect and integrity. As professionals, teachers are expected to demonstrate good judgment and common sense at all times. Their actions should be as transparent as possible and have the appropriate consent of supervisors and parents and guardians." Section 264 of the Education Act further reinforces these virtues and responsibilities. Recently, however, some attempts have been made in Canada to reinterpret and redefine the term professionalism, claiming it is somehow an oppressive ideal that must be dismantled because it is, quote, "rooted in colonial, cis-heteronormative, patriarchal, white supremacist, Eurocentric settler values." This new and uncommon worldview requires robust public debate. Any attempts to redefine professionalism through this lens must be given due public consultation. The term professionalism appears in hundreds of Canadian policies, guides, and legal judgments where it is imbued with a positive and moral framework that fits the community's collective notion of what it means to act professionally. Until such time that this public debate is facilitated, parents must be assured that HDSB administrators will be expected to uphold and enforce current norms and interpretations of our agreed-upon language. School boards are tasked with balancing their human rights work alongside their students' responsibilities work. The application of the Ontario Human Rights Code sets legal precedents in this regard. An individual's code-protected grounds can be accommodated while still respecting the boundaries that uphold the professional standards of an employer. It is imperative that forms of identity and expression presented in a school environment be scrutinized against the child safeguarding practices enshrined in the Ontario Child, Youth and Family Services Act. The primacy of student safety and well-being must always be distinguished, prioritized, and protected by those in positions of power. Students must come first, a sentiment that was echoed yesterday by 3 Halton MPPs, the democratically elected representatives of this region. The trustees and the board should therefore see no conflict between human rights legislation and the enforcement of existing professional standards. In closing, parents and schools alike teach children about the importance of boundaries and consent. Boundaries define professionalism in the education system and must be upheld for all, in order to restore public trust at the HDSB. The community is imploring you, the trustees, to hold our institutions to account and enforce long-standing policies and practices that center student well-being and parental rights. Thank you.
Thank you. If the gallery could please hold their applause, thank you. Do trustees have any questions for? Again, please, if I can please remind you, we'd like to get through this meeting tonight quite expediently, and clapping and that sort of thing will not allow us to do that. So if you can please hold your applause to congratulate her once you've left the gallery. Do any trustees have any questions for our delegate this evening? Oh, sorry. Trustee Gray.
Yes, thank you very much. Through the chair, would a copy of the transcript of your speech be made available to the board?
For sure.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And just for a point of clarification on that, I have included some links in my speech that refers to the legislation and the quotes that I offered in that speech.
Thank you. Vice Chair Rocha.
Lynn, through you, Chair, through you, to you, Lynn. Thank you for your very thoughtful and considerate delegation. I do like that you've gathered many sources to come up with your delegation, and I do want to let all trustees know that we do have a copy of Lynn's delegation with all the links. So thank you very much for sharing. That was very well thought out and very well spoken. So thank you for your delegation this evening.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Just give it a little bit of wait time. Seeing no further questions from trustee, we want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Again, similar to the last ones, your item has been moved up, so it will follow the Glenview boundary review. So following the consent agenda, we'll go to item 5.1.2, which is Glenview, and that will be followed by 5.1.1, which is the professionalism policy. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Next up, we have Selena Close, and she is delegating on the role of trustee in policy development, the professionalism policy.
Good evening. I'm here this evening to speak to the professionalism policy as it relates to the responsibilities of the board, the importance of you representing and involving the students, parents, and community. Many people seem to think that trustees and boards have no right to involve themselves in setting procedures. They are wrong. The law says otherwise. Let me explain. Each province has a different power. In each province, different powers are given to school boards and trustees. Luckily, in Ontario, legislation has given meaningful powers of oversight. Under the Education Act, the board as a whole is legally accountable for its decisions, rather than individual trustees. As members of the board, trustees are elected and accountable to the public for the collective decisions of the board and for the delivery and quality of educational services. The Trustees Code of Conduct, Section 5.1, requires you to fulfill your duties in accordance with the Education Act to promote student achievement and well-being under Section 169.1. I understand this to mean that the board has the duty to ensure the policies, procedures, and actions all promote student achievement and well-being, and that the board has the ability to set procedure and dictate implementation of the actions. This is a very active and powerful position. I would like to highlight Section 169.1.1e. My ask this evening is a simple one. Make it clear that parents will have a meaningful role in finding a solution and that the board will protect that role. It is your duty as a trustee to represent all constituents, and this ask serves to reduce the tension from adults and is a small step to rebuilding the trust and confidence that has been eroded. Succinctly, my ask is that you amend the policy proposal before you tonight so that it explicitly includes a role for the board in setting of related procedures, and that these procedures are to be developed in a way that includes a meaningful role for students and parents, and that respect the rights of school staff, recognize the diversity of community opinions, support the practicalities of school operations, and above all, meets the needs of the students. I would like to highlight an example of a policy and procedure about a sensitive process, placement of principals and promotions to VP, that include a parental voice in a meaningful way. This was developed jointly by staff and the TDSB and has been in place and is working successfully for many years. It reads, parents will be consulted on any proposed changes to the procedures involving parental participation. I don't see anything stopping the HDSB from putting in place a process that follows this example. An active board, continued parental involvement, and commitment will ensure that poor decision-making is avoided and that the education, well-being, and safety of the most important assets in the education system, the students, are upheld. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Selena. I really appreciate that. Trustee Collard, you have a question?
Yes, I do. First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming here this evening. I know you've been quite actively involved in this issue. I do want to clarify something. In the Education Act, it says very clearly that trustees are to stay out of the day-to-day operations of schools, that the operations fall under the purview of the director. And so in school boards, we do not vote on procedures that affect administration. We only vote on procedures that affect governance. And that is very precisely laid out in the Education Act. We are forbidden from getting involved in the day-to-day operations. And so we try our very best to stand back. Of course, the director does bring procedures to our attention, and we ask questions, we make suggestions, but we do not control what goes into the procedure. The director does. I understand that you would like us to make it clear that parents will have a meaningful role in finding a solution, and we absolutely want you to have a meaningful role. This impacts your students, your children, your families, your communities, and we want parents to have a meaningful role. And that's why we have the delegations. That's why we have the emails that come in, the phone calls that come in. We speak to everyone who calls us, and everyone who writes us hopefully gets a response. Sometimes we get deluged and it's difficult, but we do try to respond to every parent. And we do try to listen to every delegation. We understand the perspectives of parents is not always the same as the perspective of the people that run the board, because you live in the community and the people that run the board might not live in your community. And so that is a difference. But we do want parental student input, community input, stakeholder input, because you are the people that we serve. And so I do appreciate that, and thank you for bringing that in your delegation.
So just to clarify, so you don't see an issue in including this in this procedure?
I'm sorry, what would you like to include in the procedure?
The parents will be consulted on any proposed changes to the procedure involving parental participation.
That would be part of an administrative procedure. What we're dealing with right now is the policy. The procedure gets written after the policy is approved.
And my ask is that, so can you explain what the board's involvement is in the procedures?
We are presented the procedures by the director. We give our feedback and input, and sometimes the director makes modifications based on our feedback and input.
That's exactly.
Yeah, so we can ask for this, but it's the director's decision at the end of the day whether or not to include something like that in a procedure, because procedures are beyond our purview. I know that that's not something you like to hear, but that's what the Education Act says.
This actual piece was negotiated between the staff and the board at Toronto District School Board.
I'll have to look into that
Sure.
further.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Are there any further questions from any other trustees? Again, Selena, thank you so much for coming. Again, as I mentioned to the person before you, this has come up in the agenda, so it will be following the Glenview boundary review. Thank you for your perspective. All right, next up.